Okay, morning YouTube worm friends, and welcome to an edition of What to Do When There Are Problems in Your Worm Bin. For example, this is the European Nightcrawler bin, and it already has problems because, as you see, it's plastic. Even though I have drilled plenty of aeration holes in it, and it sits inside of another bin because there are a ton of aeration holes on the bottom, resting up on blocks to continually assist with airflow. Even though that's in place, if you look at the bedding, specifically just under the word "the" on another piece of paper, you'll actually see some standing liquid, and that is because this worm bin is too wet. Look at those two little guys. I just lifted the lid off of it, and they're like, "Oh no, let us out. We're making a break for it." And part of the reason why this bin is too wet is because I took the kitchen trimmings from my friend Gigi. I hadn't fed the bin in a while. I weighed them, and even though they had been frozen and then dried out, there was still about 12 pounds of food that went into the bin. And yes, the night crawlers had already taken care of the compost taken care of composting what I had put in there previously. So it was time to feed them. But in this case, because of the large nature of the amount of organic material that's breaking down, there's a lot of liquid and there's a lot of wetness in this bin. So I wanted you to see this because we're going to have to do some things to correct this. First of all, the first thing I did was when I put it in, I knew this was potential for happening. I put in a very deep layer of bedding. And when it was dry and light and fluffy, this bedding, I would say was about 3 inches. And what I have noticed, and I don't see if I can have one here, is that I have an ant or two running around in here as well. And I think that came from Gigi's leavings, because I haven't had any issue with that at all in my own bins. So looking down in here they are. They're very wet. This is a watermelon rind that I'm turning over. And you're going to see a lot of worms underneath of there. Happily, they really like the watermelon, and that's good. Now this is interesting. This was a large bunch of what appeared to be celery that went straight in. And there was also, over in this area of the bin, see, they're really working on it. The light is not great, but you can see them wiggling around. That's kale. The problem is, I set all of this stuff on top. I covered it over with dry bedding. But what are we going to do now? There's one. Yeah. It's an ant. Not a bad one, just a little tiny black one. But I don't particularly want them in the bin either, but they're attracted by the same types of food. So we have to correct the problem. Now, the obvious answer is to add more dry bedding, and that's true. But these worms have been composting, as you know, for more than several weeks. We're down into several months now. And if I can see down in here into this layer, move some of this away, we have a huge, I don't want to disturb the worms too much because the Europeans don't really like that, but if I can get past these coffee filters and coffee grounds, just using my fingers, I think we've got, until I can reach the bottom of the bin, there's a good 5 inches of matter in there. Well, including lots of little worms, and that is a cocoon. If I can bring it out into focus. There we go. That's a cocoon sitting right there. And that'll hatch soon. The more worms, the better, certainly. And I have a huge amount of matter in here, including some old rotting, look at this. That's a mango that was whole in her freezer. So one of the things that you can do to kind of assist things along and assist them along is, and I wear gloves for this specifically, is just kind of break up the food as it gets to the stage where it's already naturally decomposing. Part of the problem when you have a highly wet system like this is that down in the bottom, they're going to be having difficulty getting air down there. And I don't want to toss and turn this bin as though it were a hair dryer, or a clothing dryer, or act like you want to turn a hair dryer on it to dry it out. You don't want that. Just leave the top of the bin off. And then just very gently, pushing around the sides, reach your fingers in, because you can feel it. Normally it feels like kind of a damp earth, but this feels wet, almost like mud. You want to lift this gently just at the sides to introduce a little bit of extra airflow in there, because you're gonna have to dry it out a little bit, just like that. And as soon as they finish composting all of this, and it's going to take them a while, but as soon as they finish it, what we can do is it'll be time to harvest all of this great vermicompost from the Europeans, and then we can start all over again with more dry bedding and so forth. But by the time they compost all of this food, I'm estimating they're going to have a good inch or so further up the bin, and it'll be time for it to come off. I want you to see this. Look at my glove. Look how wet that is and smeary. That definitely means that the conditions in here are just too wet, and we don't want it to bog down and cause the worms to be in conditions that are too wet, or else they're going to make a break for it. Now, here they are. They're on a piece of coffee filter from my last mushroom growing experiment. And they're doing okay, but you can really see the liquid kind of resting on top and in this bedding. And when you reach your finger down and kind of pull up from the bottom, it's very compacted and feels a lot like mud. So the answer here is to give the worms extra dry bedding, which is what I'll add next, and then leave the top off as much as you can, in particular during the day. If you have the opportunity to leave the lid off and there's light, it will keep them from running away. They'll stay down in the bedding. Here, look at that little guy on my finger. That little red line is a little tiny worm. So, because we've had such good success with their breeding, we want to keep that going by giving them the best conditions that they can have. So I'm going to add more dry bedding to this, and we're not going to feed this bin for a while. Leave the lid off and let the air circulate so that it has a chance to dry out naturally. You want to leave your lid on at night so that they don't make a run for it in the dark, especially when you keep them inside like I do. But certainly you can just take it off in the morning, leave the kitchen light on, and continue to let it dry over the period of a few days, and it should correct itself. The smell, honestly, even though it's wet, is not as bad as you might anticipate, and I want to correct the bin problems before it gets to that stage. So that's all from the worms today, and I'll see you again next time.